Hello and welcome to this course on how to use the Dashboard Wireframe Kit. My name is Nicholas Kelly, and throughout this journey you're going to be learning how to wireframe your own dashboards from scratch, and I'll be going through the process to allow you to go from user requirements all the way up to wireframing your dashboard. But before we get started, a little bit of an analogy that I like to use to set the tone and an example for what's important in dashboard design and dashboard wireframing. So imagine you have a burger sitting in front of you and you have a choice. Your choice is that you can eat it or not eat it. And the not eat it may be an unconscious choice. You may not think that is an option because you've already got the burger in front of you. But we're still going to try and change your behavior and change your decision. So imagine you have some data available to you. Would you still eat it? So imagine by next Tuesday, you'll increase your weight and also you'll increase your risk of heart attack. Now, for some people, that's not going to be enough to change your behavior. So there are 4 criteria that will give you the greatest possibility of changing someone's decision. The information needs to be relevant. So you can see that this is information related to the action that we're doing. So we're going to eat food, and that's going to have an impact on our health. And you can see the information here is information that's related to that activity. So it's weight gain and it's an increase of heart attack, increased risk of heart attack. So the information is related and relevant to the activity we're currently doing. The information is also timely. So we're getting this in or around the time we're going to eat the burger. This is the period of time where we can influence that decision. So having this information maybe before you buy the burger or before you make the burger, or indeed as late as up to 5 or 10 seconds before you're going to eat the burger, that the information is timely. You're not getting it 3 months later when maybe it's interesting information, but you've less power to do something about it. For sure it can influence your future decisions, but you won't be able to change the decision you made 3 months prior. The information is personal. So this is not averaged data for a bunch of different people. This is specifically information related to your physiology, your eating habits, your exercise, and your background. For example, if you had maybe 10 drinks of Coke the day before and 15 burgers the day before that, that's all going to be taken into account. And this is important because as we go through this process of wireframing, we take a very focused personal approach to how we design dashboards, what's called the persona approach. And this comes from the user experience world, where we will design specifically for a role or a type of person that has similar characteristics across a group of people, so that the information they see is intuitive and understandable to them. So very, very important that it has to be personal. And then, possibly most importantly, it needs to be actionable. If we're not changing behavior and enabling action, then why are we doing this in the first place? And ultimately, we need to be able to influence the bottom line of the business. So getting your charts and your data and your dashboards actionable is of fundamental importance. Now, with that understanding, we're going to proceed through the rest of the training, trying to adhere as best we can to these 4 principles. A little bit of an introduction about myself. I recently moved to Seattle a few years ago and from Singapore with my family, where in Singapore I was working for Deloitte Analytics, and I got exposure to quite a lot of different experiences that very much influenced my decision of where I needed to go with the Dashboard Wireframe Kit, and that the opportunity to start wireframing very, very fast and rapid approach to creating dashboards. Now, I've trained quite a few folks over the years and done a lot of workshops with the Global Fortune 100. I'm an international speaker on the topic of analytics user experience, and I run the website Nixite, and obviously created the Dashboard Wireframe Kit. My background is a blend of computer science and user experience and user interface design, user interface development, and blended with business and analytics. And I found that mixture was a very suitable one for data visualization. you sort of need that blend. And if you don't have that blend, you would need to hire different folks with those capabilities and bring them together somehow. It is that bit in the middle, that blending of these characteristics, where you can create value. So think of the dashboard wireframe kit as that intersection of these three areas. It's either one person has it, which is not so common, or you would have a group of people coming together to do that. And that's what the wireframe kit facilitates. So I've done extensive work in bringing user experience to analytics, and I'm known for bringing that, both sides of the business and data science and analytics together, where there tends to be quite a big divide. So it's a fairly extensive background related to user experience, and how then I moved and shifted right over to analytics and applied all that learnings then to all of these folks, these companies that I've worked with over the years. So as we moved on into the understanding what we want to cover in this session, there's a bunch of primary topics we're going to do. So we're going to look at what it actually is, what's the kit, and we're going to understand that by understanding what the problem was behind it, and then why it was created. So what problem is it solving? And then obviously how it works. We'll get into the nitty-gritty details of all the process that you can use to do it. And there's two ways that I create using the dashboard wireframe kit. One is more ad hoc. I'll just pull out the kit and just do it myself on the spot. There's also a more comprehensive process that I use, and we'll be covering both in this session. And then we'll be looking at the process. It's the enterprise dashboard process. That's a extensive step-by-step process you can use to get the most out of the kit. And then we'll look at a case study example of that and how it's applied. So we talked about what is the kit, and in a bit more detail. Think of it as a board game. Think it has the constituent parts of a board game. There's obviously the box, there's the board, and the board is laid out very, very deliberately and consciously to enable storytelling. And it's done with the understanding that people tend not to read instructions or watch training videos too much. So how do you create something that people can quickly use and understand, knowing that they probably won't look at training materials? So this is the same philosophy I'll take with dashboards and dashboard training. Let's embed the training on the material itself. And an example you'll see as we go through the enterprise dashboard process is I'll embed training in the dashboard. It'll be a separate tabs on the dashboard will have training for how to use the dashboard. And it's the same case with the kit. The training is written directly onto the board. It's also written directly onto some of the cards as well. So that all you really need for just a quick and dirty way of using the kit, it's all there already. So you can see the different areas of the dashboard. You can see you've got filters down the left, and it's giving you examples and telling you how to use it. You've got KPIs along the top, and you can see there's a gray KPI. Anything you see in gray is a sample. It's giving an example of what you could put there. So you'll see then how that KPI leads down to the chart below it. So there's a relationship between those two, the KPI and the chart. And we'll be diving into much greater detail onto why and what that is. Now you can see over on the left there's light blue cards. They're the KPI cards. And you'll see that there's two sides to every single card. A card has a presentation layer, this is what you see, it has a title. And a card also has a meta layer on the reverse side. And the meta layer depends on the type of card, but in the example of a KPI card, it is when does this KPI change color, for example? Let's say you have gross margin, and if it drops below 20%, you want it to change orange. You would write that here on the back of the cards. And that's the beauty of this, is you can then just take a few photos of the presentation layer of your wireframe kit and the meta layer of the wireframe kit, and hopefully all the information is there that you can then hand it off to other people to give their feedback. You can also hand it off to developers and analysts, are the folks who are going to build the dashboard, and they should have a reasonable understanding. It won't be comprehensive, but most people won't do comprehensive. So this is a much better step than not doing anything at all. Then you can see under the KPIs, we have the chart cards. And you'll see there's a similar setup here. We got the front and the back. You've got the presentation layer, you got the meta layer. The nice thing about these chart cards is on the top right of every card, On the meta side, you have a very, very small graphic of what that chart looks like. The reason that's there is, if you're flicking through the deck of, 50, 60 cards, you just have to look up in that corner to see what the chart is. So you can quickly, if you're looking for a specific type of chart, you can quickly find it. Now you'll also notice on the meta layer side, it's got 2 criteria. These are going to be of fundamental importance as we go through this training. But you'll notice they've got a action and a what action is being taken and what's the question that you're answering with this chart. So it sort of forces you to think about those things. And at the bottom, you'll see there's usage. And this is where you get some help and guidance in picking the right type of chart. You'll see it's comparison or it's relationship or comparison over time. So depending on the type of question that you have, you will then pick the appropriate card which has the associated chart for that. That's most relevant for that. Now, over on the right side, you'll see some example of the chart cards where there's an extender. And this is an example where, let's say you only have 3 charts on a dashboard, then you can use an extender card to say, well, extend this map chart on the left to be the full, to take up 2 chart spaces. So there's some flexibility there. And then on the top right, you see the green. Then they're the filters. And we'll be looking at all this in detail as we move through it. So to understand why it was created, we have to understand what's the problem it's solving. And there are several, but first and foremost, not understanding user needs. And you think about this in how a dashboard is usually built. Let's just take a typical, reasonably small enterprise dashboard. A request might come from an executive saying, "Hi Jane, please create a sales performance dashboard. We'll need it by the end of the week." And that's typically how it goes. Maybe different in your scenario, but let's take this scenario. So Jane's looking at this and going, okay, I need to create a sales performance dashboard. I kind of have an idea what that is. I'm assuming it's going to be, let's see our dollar sales number. Let's see our net margin, our gross margins, some of these things. Now, what Jane doesn't have is a fundamental understanding of who is the user. Is it the executive? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's a completely different set of people. Maybe it's the sales department. Maybe it's the marketing department. Maybe marketing needs to understand what's going on in sales. Now that's critical to understand that, because what if it's marketing who needs to understand what's going on with sales? They're going to want to see different things. That's helping them do their job. So as we go through the process, you're going to see how you can further understand user needs in the typical work and business environment. Now the next one, and it's somewhat related, is the failure to create business value. If you're getting that information, you're getting a request to build this dashboard, you're not necessarily thinking, is this going to help affect the bottom line of the business? It's not your job, right? It's not really what you've been hired for. Yet, the dashboard will ultimately be judged on its ability to impact the bottom line. You think of companies with different maturities in analytics, and the ones that have been burned a few times, let's say 5-6 years ago, they invested several million in building a data warehouse. And the time comes around where the CEO is going to go, okay, so we invested that money, where's that return on investment? So there might be a few red faces and a few heads might roll. And really the reason for that is because business value isn't being created. And where does business value get created in analytics? It tends to be in the interface between the data and people, allowing those people to take action on the data. And that tends to be, not always, but it tends to be the dashboard that does that. So if the dashboard isn't creating business value, this is the fundamental break that we have in that chain to get return on investment. Now, even if you have built your dashboard, what if people can't find it? And what if people can't act on it because they just don't know it exists? So that's obviously important. And then the ability to access training on it. So we'll touch on that in the process as we go through this. Then understanding poor user experience and the barriers that are created by change management. Regularly, folks are going to be put in a dashboard, they don't know how to use it. So how do you change their mindset to give them something that's valuable enough to their job to help them start using it as a part of their, if not daily, hopefully weekly usage of the dashboard to help them with their work. Now, quite often I get the feedback, well, look, this is all fine and well, but if we have really crap data quality, then what's the point in wireframing a dashboard at all? Well, I would say it's one of the best reasons to do it, because what you can surface is all these data quality problems. And as you'll see as we go through this process, a lot of it is around communication. So let's say someone requests some dashboard and you can say, okay, look, here's a wireframe of what we think we can do. And their feedback is, hey, this isn't very useful. There's just not very valuable information here. And then the feedback is, well, what would you like to see? And there can be a bit of back and forth, a bit of an exchange. And let's say you come with a wireframe with what that stakeholder would like to see. Well, you could say, look, those 7 metrics that you've listed there, the data quality is very poor. However, if you make an investment in X, Y, and Z, I think by 6 months' time in version 3 of the dashboard, we'll have something that's way more valuable and much more aligned. But you need to go on that journey with people. And that's really all about communication and getting the investment to improve the data quality. So that can support that activity, the wireframing process. And of course, there are many roles, and that goes back to the persona focus. So there's many people involved typically. So you got IT, you've got the business, you've got stakeholders, you've got executives, you've got analysts, you've got consultants. How do you bring them all together? And as you can see, there's a lot of challenges here around this. So why are we doing this in the first place at all? We've got data, we want profit. There's a question mark there. As I mentioned earlier, the interface to generating profit from data tends to be a dashboard. It's not always a dashboard, just tends to be a dashboard in business. So what is exactly that question mark? Well, to understand that question mark, we need to look at how we get there. What's causing the gap between data and users? So the more we reduce that gap, the closer we're going to get to profit. So think of, and a nice analogy here is to think of the traditional gap between the business and IT. And, you know, the IT always under pressure, always lots to do, and the business always throwing them these last minute requests. And so IT thinks businesses, doesn't really understand technical things. And then the business is thinking about IT, God, we hired these guys to do such and such, and they're always complaining they don't have enough time, right? So there's this gap there. I would argue the gap is worse between the business, let's say users for an example, and the data analysts or the data scientists. And if you think of the typical data scientist, smart, well-educated, but can be a little bit introverted, not all the time, but tends to be the stereotype. And of course, business users tend to be somewhat of the reverse. So they're non-technical and they're pretty outgoing. They have to be outgoing in order to be successful in their job usually. And of course, these are generalizations. It's, there's individual levels will obviously vary. The more we can close that gap, the closer we're going to get to profit. And that's what this process is going to do. And if you think of software back in around the 1990s. What was good software? Well, good software was something that had a lot of features. And that's a software developer's perspective of what is good software. And then along came user experience and the UX perspective around the 2000s with a completely different take on that. So good software has what the user needs. So it's not about features anymore. Of course, features are important, but it's not about quantity of features. It's about enabling the user to do what they need to do. And if we think of that in the data context, well, the past and for sure there's still some current thinking that's similar to this, but a good dashboard shows lots of data, and it's a data scientist perspective. And it seems obvious. I mean, it's just like, that makes sense. That's pretty reasonable. But it is very similar to that quantity take on a good user interface for software. Something has lots of features. Whereas it's shifting now. Good analytics changes behavior. And think of that as the analytics UX perspective on what is a good dashboard. So it has to be about behavioral change. And there's a few nuances here that we also have to be aware of as we're going through this process. Because we're going to be dealing with data, we'll obviously have data scientists, we'll have the business. The business and business users are generally reasonably well understood, but there is certainly a new beast in town, And the typical person working with data is a little bit more introverted. And that's a good thing because, there's certain characteristics to that makes them good at working with data. Again, not always the case. It can be a little bit theoretical. Pros and cons to it. If they weren't theoretical, they wouldn't have all the knowledge they need to do to build models and to process and analyze the data. So none of these things are really negatives. These are just how things are. So understanding that, we can understand how to solve for it. Can miss the so what. And this is where the disconnect happens between data and the business. So why are we doing this? What's the point? So none of this is particularly new, though it is a significant enough problem that most of the big four firms have created a solution to this in the form of workshops and facilitating an experience around solving these problems. And the approach is really to have an environment or a space where you can bring a group of people, ideally the stakeholders and users and all the personas and people involved in the dashboard, and bring them into a space that has lots of whiteboards and some, large touchscreens where you can have a bit of technology and facilitate that experience around solving a problem around designing a dashboard. So the benefits of this is that it works really, really well. It's very successful. It's a great approach to it. The challenges, though, and the downsides are it can be very expensive. And this is costly to do, and often it's hard to do because trying to get all these people into a space on a certain date and for up to a day is hard. This is hard to do and also obviously requires significant investment. So that was the intent of the Dashboard Wireframe Kit, is to have this sort of experience where you can have the physical tangible assets like you would use in this sort of workshop that has lots of activities, people are working together and brainstorming, that you could put that into a box. That's the idea behind the kit. And how it works, it's really got three fundamental key ingredients behind it. The first of these is storytelling. Now, you've obviously heard a lot about storytelling, particularly in relation to dashboards and data. I have a slightly different perspective than what most people have. I tend to favor keeping it incredibly simple. Doing storytelling works for data journalism and areas where you have really strong control over the data and the visuals. However, that is often not the case in the enterprise. So I keep my storytelling really, really simple, and it's embedded into the kit. You're going to see how it's embedded in there. And it's all framed around being able to answer questions. And the reason we want to be able to answer questions is ultimately we want to be able to take action, to have a path to action on the dashboard. The shorter that path to action, the better. Now, in some dashboards, you're able to see the path to action is there, right there on the dashboard. It's embedded. You could click a button and an email automatically gets sent to, say, the sales department, and you're telling them, hey, check the inventory, it needs to be updated, whatever the case may be, that the path to action is very, very short. An example of a long and high friction path to action might be, okay, we see the inventory is low for one of our suppliers. So I know I'm going to have to call, I don't know who I need to call. Okay, what I'll do is I'm going to contact my manager and ask them, do they know who I need to talk to in which department, in procurement or sales or wherever it is that I need to talk to. Okay, so I get a list of people that I can contact, and I try contacting them. Some don't answer, some don't respond to my emails. It gets very convoluted. So the shorter the path to action, the better ultimately it's going to be. And so that's the three fundamental aspects that we're going to be looking at and how they get manifested in the Dashboard Wireframe Kit.